Everybody, it's Tony Wiggins here. We're locked on Jaguars on a Tuesday, talking hidden gems, guys that are already on the roster that have to develop if the Jaguars are ever going to start taking the steps needed to be a winner. I'll discuss it here today on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jags, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, good people, on the Tuesday? I'm Tony Wiggins here, your host of Locked On Jaguars. Been covering this team, it feels like, for half my life. They don't win a lot, but we are still winners here, and we thank you for making us your first listen and reminding you that we're free on all platforms. And today's episode is brought to you by Rock Auto, which has amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. You know, I was thinking, while we are so hot and heavy with NFL draft, and we just got done with free agency, and then we're going to worry about phase 2 of free agency as the Jaguars keep having guys come in and visit. We're locked into how they're adding talent, and we're locked into, I'm locked on it too, right? We're locked in it, and we're locked on it, but we're locked into how the team procures talent. But there's another thing that's silently and quietly that when you listen to NFL people, they discuss all the time, and that is player development. And it's very, very important. I think sometimes when we think about player development, the only thing we think about are the guys who were picked high. Because in the past, the Jaguars have drafted guys that didn't develop. Blake Bortles, right? Didn't develop. And it just didn't happen. And when we talk about player development, we talk about those misses of those guys that never improved and got better. And then when you did have guys who developed, they left because of not trusting the front office and not being able to come to agreements and personality differences and all of that stuff. So there's a big part of player development that comes before free agency. Let me explain what it is. We've often talked about the difference between the director of college scouting and director of player personnel and the director of pro personnel. So pro personnel is the guy who he pays attention to every other NFL roster, right? So he has a smaller department. They look at the NFL rosters of other teams. They look at games that their team that they work for aren't involved in. Like while the Jags are playing, they might be looking at their own guys. They're looking at evaluating the backups from the other team. They're also watching games that don't involve the Jaguars, and they're watching players from both of those teams. Why are they doing that? Because those guys will eventually become free agents, right? How do you think they found out about Fujisaki, right? They found out about him. I remember when he signed, people were like, who the hell is that? And I knew he was watching names on lists, but I had no idea that the Jaguars were that keenly interested in him. And the same thing that, can be said about Floyd, the linebacker that they got, right? So the thing is these guys weren't guys that were off the radar. They were people that the pro personnel folks watched and had a book on and paid attention to them probably for the last year or two. So if you're doing that with other people's teams and players, you're also having to do that with your own. The difference is you don't see a lot of developmental guys from Jacksonville move on, or you don't see a lot of developmental guys from Jacksonville actually improve and get better. And it's one of the things that the Jaguars, in my opinion, have been absolutely terrible at. Outside of Tyler Shatley, like last year when they went and signed Jamal Agnew, and they had coaches here who had coached Agnew before in Detroit. That's a perfect player development example that Detroit did very well with him, right? Now, anybody can do well with Christian Kirk because they drafted him to be a dude who Arizona drafted him to be a guy who's going to make plays for him in the second round. The player development aspect comes when you get guys who are off the radar from other teams and you poach them. One way you can get them is to do it for yourself. Where when a guy comes up through the ranks and like Tyler Shatley, he's homegrown Jaguar, player developed. They've seen him work through the process, right? And you hope Juwan Taylor, who was picked in the second round, and Walker Little, who's picked in the second round, get developed. You know who else was developed? Tehran Armstead. Remember when Tehran Armstead came out of a small HBCU and was a second or third round pick? I think it was second round pick with New Orleans. Developed into an all-pro type player, right? I think back going to teams like Green Bay when they got like guys like Donald Driver and Greg Jennings and Jordy Nelson. Those guys were drafted third round and beyond and ended up being guys who were developed properly, built up. I want you to think about the last time a Jaguars player, I'm sitting here right now, James Robinson. He had one good year, but they already sort of replaced him a little bit. But just go back and just try to imagine when's the last time a homegrown guy, maybe Telvin Smith, came out of nowhere and got to the top of his positional chart in the NFL. The Jaguars have to do more of that. One, you got to develop your high-priced players too. Like Taven Bryan never developed. So far, Juwan Taylor hasn't developed. Will Richardson was re-signed. He hasn't really developed and turned into more than they actually were when you got him. Just think about it. Avery Jones was a pretty good example of a guy who you got some development out of him. You didn't, spend a lot of money for him, but you developed him and he ended up doing way more than anybody ever thought. He got to a second contract and he was a valuable member of your football team. I'll give you a perfect example of a development guy, Grady Jackson or Grady Jarrett. Grady Jarrett's a perfect example. You know what? Mid-round pick, now an all-pro. It's unbelievable that that's where he is right now. Mid-round pick, all-pro, one of the best three techniques and defensive linemen in the National Football League. That's what has to happen. At some point, there are teams around the NFL that have guys like that other people's teams, other teams like your Jaguars are coveting. That's what has to happen, along with the players they pick up front at the top have to be good, of course. The free agents that they go sign for big money have to be good. But the other thing that has to happen, the young players that they get in have to be properly developed through nutrition, through gains in the weight room, to understanding the game, to being contributors. I'm going to give you a couple examples of guys that I think that have a major shot in doing that. Yes, there are people on the roster currently that the Jaguars have hope, that we all have hope that can turn into something. I know for us, it's real easy for everyone to just think about the high price guys and think about the big play guys, because those are the guys that seem like they're few and far in between. But the people who do this for a living can't afford to sit here and not function and worry about all of it. So I'm going to explain who the guys are that are on the roster, some no-name guys, and I call them no-name guys because they're not people that folks talk about. I'm going to do that in segment 2. Segment 3, I'm going to talk about the guys whose names you do know that have to turn up if this thing is ever going to turn around here in Jacksonville. And I'll do it in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars after I tell you guys about BetOnline.net, which is the number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, including this week's Masters Championship odds, podcasts, and reviews for all the different leagues this season. I don't know about y'all, but I'm hoping Tiger can get another green jacket. I think these odds might be through the roof that it's going to happen because he had a bad injury, but I don't put anything past great players and great people who know how to do things that you shouldn't be. Talk about development. Tiger Woods, I'm going to find that and put some Skrilla on him winning. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. Now, you need to head to the website today on your laptop, or you can use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action, because BetOnline is where the game starts. where you start with us here every single day is Locked On Jaguars, and we appreciate you and thank you for making us your first listen, because we are what? Your team every day. All right, some guys that are under the radar that have to develop. Now, I don't want you guys to think that this is that player development is just for guys who you don't expect anything from and you get things from. No, you have to develop even the guys that you pay a lot of money and use high draft picks on too. But we're going to do it a little bit from the inside out. We're going to make you eat your vegetables first and eat that part of the meal that's really, really good for you. And, vegetables usually the cheapest thing on your plate. So these guys are the cheapest players on the team right now that the Jaguars got. I'm going to name a couple of second-year players and one who I really, really like, and it's personal for me. A couple of them are personal, but this one's really, really personal because I saw the kid when he was in the ninth grade playing with my son in high school. So let's go with Shaq Quarterman. Shaq Quarterman at linebacker. Now, the Jaguars signed a linebacker in free agency they gave a lot of money to. They didn't retain their other Mike linebacker. So they have this inside linebacker, off-the-ball linebacker. It's called a Mike. One's the Mike, one's inside. One's still considered a weak side in this base defense that they're going to run, which is a 3-4, sort of a hybrid. It turns into a 4-2-5 on nickel situations. You still need two guys that have the skill set to be able to navigate through and play off the ball and don't get eaten up by guards, and to be able to play in space and also get out to the flats, and then be able to also turn around and handle the seam when you're dealing with stuff in the middle of the field. So if Shaq Quarterman is going to get on the field, he has an opportunity to compete for one of those inside spots this year. Physical, Shaq is he's about 6'1.5". He's a little taller than me. Goes somewhere between 235 and 240, and he looks like he's a little bit quicker. So if the Jaguars are going to get anything out of Shaq, it's going to be his ability to move in space, because he's always been a bumper thumper. He'll always come up and hit. I think his ability to move side to side is going to be something that you're going to watch and see if they can get the best out of him through their strength and conditioning program. He has a chance. He has a chance to be a really good linebacker for the Jaguars. And if he does, it'll change this trend that they have of having to go out and get other players from other teams to make the linebacker a success here in Jacksonville. So he's one of those guys I'm looking for in the middle. Another guy that I'm looking for to see if he can provide depth and even challenge for a position, he's got to be healthy now, is Dylan Moses. Dylan Moses was a 5-star recruit. He was all-world as a freshman for Alabama, and then he hurt his knee. And he's been rehabbing and recovering that knee and trying to get back. And I heard right now he's 100%, he's a full go. So we're going to see what Dylan Moses has. Now, Dylan offers you a little bit more range. He has a little more size, at least lengthwise. I think he goes about 6'2", 6'2.5". If he can live up to his potential and they can develop him and get something out of him, these will be the types of things that moving forward, the Jaguars are not having to go out and replenish by signing guys from somewhere else. These would be two guys at a very critical position that would be considered homegrown talent. And when you look around at the teams that win in the league, this is exactly what they do, and this is exactly what they have. You look at these teams that win, and when you look at their roster at certain critical positions, you'll find guys chosen second, third, fourth, fifth round that are now major contributors for those ball clubs. And like safety, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, perfect example. Drafted by the Saints, homegrown, and is a full-grown man, and he's one of the guys that has the Saints defense. He's like, when you think about the Saints defense, you think about a picture of number 22. That's exactly what the Jaguars need. They need guys that they have drafted in their own system, and I just named you two guys who roam the middle of the linebacker core. Now I'm going to give you one that plays on the outside of the linebacker core. Young man that I've gotten to know pretty well, who basically has a little bit different of an attitude that he had when he got in here last year, and that's Jordan Smith. First of all, if you've never talked to Jordan, everybody's going to think about Jordan. They're going to think about him throwing up on the field. He'll laugh about that stuff. He even picked at it. But if you see him in person, he's one of those dudes you want that if your football team pulls up on some charter buses, you want him getting off first. I had him. He came by and visited me in my office one day, and when he left, somebody goes, "Who's he play for?" He's a basketball player. What NBA team? No, he's not NBA. He's a linebacker. He's an outside linebacker and an edge rusher. Jordan is every bit of 6'6", and he might be close to 6'7". And his shoulders are really, really wide. And I got good news for you. He's been working really, really hard this offseason. He's gained some weight. So I would suspect that Jordan last year was somewhere in the 240s. He might be over 260 now. Now, don't get me wrong. All of these guys aren't going to come up and all of a sudden be superstars. But if you could get a 6'6" inline edge rusher at basically he's the size right now of Aiden Hutchinson. That's how big he is. If you get a guy like that to develop as homegrown and you got him under a rookie deal for another 2 seasons at least, it just turns into you're playing with house money. So I just named 3 players that you hope can turn out and be contributors. And they don't even have to be superstars. They can be Tyler Shatley type of a contributor. You know what I'm saying? But it'll help this team, and it'll fortify this team, and it'll give this team less things that they have to go out and look for when it comes to free agency and the draft in the future. And that bodes well, because what do I always talk about? I always talk about identity. I just used the example of identity with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. I'm gonna get his name right. Don't be having 3 names with me, because you most likely gonna get them screwed up. But the thing is this is exactly what I'm talking about when I'm talking about homegrown talent, when I'm talking about player development, when I'm talking about retaining your own guys, possibly even loading them up with a team-friendly contract a year before they're supposed to get money, and keeping the pilferers and the people who are just like Jaguars, who go and looking around and try to cherry pick from other people's players because they can't develop their own. Now, some obvious people that have to actually develop and grow and get better. We talked about guys that have the names that you might not know, or that you might not be thinking about, because free agency and the draft is so much about stars and proven players, right? Well, now we're going to talk about the guys that have to take a step. Even if they've already shown that they can be good, they have to really get better. We'll talk about them in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless and seemingly intimidating questions like, is your Odyssey an LX or an EX? And I can't stand that when people ask me that. And, you have to wait while the person behind the counter orders your parts on the computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry. You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket, in the name of your phone. I just hit myself in the head. Save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30, 50, or 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a dealership when you can do it yourself at rockauto.com? Now, here's what you got to do. You go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know we sent you. My daughter lives in Charlotte. She's 25 years old. She's grown. But guess what? I still ask her about her car. I check her fluid levels. I check her parts when she's here. And I know what good parts look like, because we got some of them for rockauto.com, because her car was relatively new. But still, I'm happy that she's safe while she's driving around up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and you can do the same for your family. Make sure you visit rockauto.com, and when you see How Did You Hear About Us in that box, make sure you write Locked On so they know we sent you. All right, man, we rolling through here on a Tuesday. Tony Wiggins, Locked On Jaguars, your team every day. Making us your first listen is your priority. Delivering content has been mine since I've been covering this team since its inception professionally for about 12, 13 years now. So I try to give you guys what you want and what you need to hear about your Jacksonville Jaguars. We're talking player development. We're talking about how important it is for homegrown talent to be grown. I mean, if it's homegrown, you want it to grow, right? Homegrown talent, you want to grow into your own contributors, so that you can have something familiar that you identify with and know who you are, know whose you are. You think about the teams that traditionally have done well with homegrown players. Pittsburgh Steelers, the model of consistency. And I've said for a long time, probably the greatest sports organization of my lifetime. I'm 53 people. They've had 3 coaches, and all 3 of them won a championship. And you get like that because you understand the type of players you want to go get. You understand what your goal is, what your identity is. And when you do that, all of that stuff sort of runs together. Now, I talked about Jordan Smith, Dylan Moses, and Shaq Quarterman. Now I'm going to talk about some other guys I mentioned earlier. Jawan Taylor, we're watching. We want to see what this new coaching staff can do with that mountain of a man at 6'5", 325 pounds. You just don't want guys like that who can move the way he moves to not eventually develop and to be not just a starter because he's in the lineup, but a true starting right tackle or right guard or wherever they're going to play him in the National Football League. And you don't want that to happen somewhere else. You want it to happen right here. Walker Little, we're watching you. Same position group, same 2 guys that I'm talking about. They have to be more consistent. They have to grow and develop. And it's all on this coaching staff to see if they can pull all of that stuff out of them. Andre Cisco, you're on deck too. I want to see him develop from a guy who can look really fast on the field to a guy that coaches really can depend on and not, they can't lose him. They don't want to take him out because they depend on him just that much. Those are 3 guys that I really, really hope develop. Now, I'm going to go a little step further, and I'm going to say Devon Hamilton because I actually think Devon Hamilton's a really good player. Well, now they got another big guy right next to him, and he probably will be able to use his athleticism a little bit more and playing at a regular defensive tackle or even a big defensive end spot in their base alignment. So he's been able to be big, physical, and disruptive, and he's one of those guys that an NFL coach was standing at practice, and he looked at him. He looked at Cam Robinson, and he looked at him. And he said, "That's what winning players look like." Yeah, Dave Campo, when he was coaching in Dallas, he said they look like the guys that we had. So when you see Devon Hamilton, you realize he's a mountain of a man. He's huge. He's big. He has quickness for that size. I want to see this scouting department and this staff and these trainers and these coaches take those 4 guys and turn them into guys that are staples and household names. Imagine if this works. Imagine if Walker Little, Jawan Taylor, if they just blow the spot and the Jaguars offensive line, you don't have to go find anybody next year. And you still have Brandon Scherf. And if you draft a lineman at some point this year, you'll have him. That means you're not sitting there looking at Cam Robinson next year and even have to give him more money or whatever. You don't have to do that. Just imagine if these guys are developed and they start to become household names outside of Jacksonville, like people around the league know who they are. Imagine if out of nowhere, Jordan Smith is an 8-sack guy. Yeah, like Preston Smith is a minimum 8-sack guy up in Green Bay. This is where the Max Crosbys of the world are made, man. It's made in the development. And while we all sit and love to talk about the NFL draft and talk about free agency, there's a whole crew of people. Their job is to create Pro Bowlers from names that you don't know. So I hope that the Jaguars finally have that right. They haven't had that right in a long time. I think when Tom Coughlin was here as head coach, they had it. They were bringing guys along because you didn't know who guys like Joel Smingy were until you knew who he was. He's a guy brought in through the system and he was developed, right? Jimmy Smith, one of the 3 greatest players of all time, brought in off the street and developed. Keenan McCardell, the 2nd best receiver of all time, brought in, developed. This is what has to happen if this team is ever going to be any good. Mark Brunell, the Ring of Honor, was a running quarterback when he got here, was coached and developed with Chris Palmer and the crew. You have to do this, man. And it's not sexy at this time of year to be thinking about it because we're thinking about other stuff. But imagine if not all of those guys maybe, but if half of the guys I mentioned on this show today turn this thing around and actually outplay your expectations, how good this team could be. Could be very good. And you can check out some of the future stars and who will be good by listening to the Locked On NFL Draft podcast. with Ryan Tracy, the analytics expert, Eric Crocker, former NFL DB, and they'll give it to you like you can't get it anywhere else, man, on the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, which is daily. You can find it wherever you get your podcast. It's free on all platforms, and they have a YouTube show as well. So make sure you check that out. All right, man. Until tomorrow, we're going to keep building this up and looking at aspects of this whole process that really, really can make. I'm going to do a dive tomorrow with Trevor Lawrence. I'm going to talk about some of the things that Trevor needs to improve on, some of the perceptions of him after year one, and mention how I think whether will it be fast or will it be slow, and what are the reasonable expectations you can expect from Trevor Lawrence this year. So we'll talk QB1 tomorrow, but for now, you guys continue to take care of each other, and I'll see you.